Once more into the breach, dear frenemies. I'm back. We are back. We are over 1/3 completed on this magnum opus. This my Stairway to Heaven, my I Can't Drive 55, my season 3, episode 4 of Gilligan's Island. We've got some friends that will be aiding us tonight. The first one I will show you. Give you a good look at this so you can see the label. So I can show you. I don't even want to whisper the name. I'll just show you the label so you'll know exactly what this is. And I'll show you the cap. Oh no, I won't show you the cap. I will look at the cap though. Ooh. Am I seeing this right? This beer demands to be imbibed this year. And even, well, this was brewed and bottled when we were still kind of quantifying times in terms of days, years, months, etc. So I don't know if this even counts anymore, but this is a Tremendos beer. I have not encountered one that's been aged this long. So this thing has been aged, I think, nearly 4 years. For most beers, that would be a complete and utter death sentence, but this style of beer and type of beer and specific beer does well by aging. You can tell from the sound of it opening that it still has that it was bottled well. And by the pour that there's still, wow, plenty of carbonation left in this thing. Boom. Can you see that? Yeah, plenty. I'm a bit surprised actually at the amount of carbonation left in this beer, considering the fact that it's been aging for years. It's a feature, not a bug. Trivia for you. Do I have a lint comb and I'm just completely too lazy, or do I just not have a lint comb? I'll leave that to you. Christ. It's just the little details that make it perfection. Anyway, so this is going to be one of our friends. I'm excited for this. This is a very good beer, built in Belgium by what we would once knew as monks, when we still identified things and gave them nouns. Oh. Okay, so we've got that. We've also got a surprise guest that's going to be aiding us on our journey. And I'm kind of excited for the surprise guest because it's such a surprise guest that even I don't know who it is. Because I am terrible at organizing everything. So we're going to be in for a surprise when this guest, let's say, makes his presence felt. I'm sure he will aid us on our quest to complete answering these questions. Oh, a little more housekeeping, and I'm putting it on video now, so it's official. This will be the last one of these I do for a little while, because my next project of this project will be getting the rest of these uploaded, and then I'm going to send them to some people. In fact, some of the people whose questions I have answered to get some guffaws and sneers and whatever else may happen. But I don't know. I've been told by a friend who has watched some of these that these are. He said it in a much kinder way, but pretty boring and not really worth watching. And that was kind of what I was going for. So I feel like I'm on the right track. But yeah, I'm going to be sending this out, and I know a lot of you are saying, "How could you do this now? This is your." Did Beethoven, write half of his air on a G string before he sent it out? I don't know. I don't know. Did Was the show called One and a Quarter Men? Of course not. Did Gallagher only smash half the watermelon? Of course not. So I get where you're coming from, but I weighed that against the ironclad guarantee that there is nuggets of wisdom in this that are going to change the world, and people need to know about it. And, my desire to do good for humanity is vastly outweighs my own personal sense of I need to accomplish this, and my own tiny vanity, which should be much larger than it is. So I'm going to take a little break after this, do some marketing work, send it out, and then we'll see. We'll let the magic commence. So anyway, I'll have one more sip of this, and then have a. It's like the best banana bread with caramel and fresh, not too much, but almost like a nice, just a walking through a wheat field with some Chiquita bananas and some bread and some. You don't judge it by the first sip. First sip coats the tongue in the mouth. It's warming like a good home. Banana's there, but not as much on the palate as it was in the nose. I let this warm up too a little bit, so it's good beer you can stand to drink warmer. Most beers could be, that's why you want to drink Budweiser at minus 412 degrees. Anyway, without any further ado, unless, are you clamoring for some further ado? Maybe a little bit more ado? No? You want to get to it? Okay. Let's get to it. Let us get to it. Here we go. Well, the H's. A, B, C, H. Or fifth letter. Daniel Hook, who is the CEO of Digital Science. Sounds like an interesting company. Sounds ripe for a passive-aggressive takeover. Watch out. Daniel Hook. Daniel Hook is the CEO of Digital Science, and his last question is, does every mathematical symmetry have a manifestation in the physical world? The first thought that came to me was a cheeky one, but it was like, yes, itself. I know that's not what he's asking for. because, of course, mathematics, most of what we found in mathematics has no symmetry that we've found in the real world. That is a devilishly interesting question. So you've got this whole mathematical world. All these, you know, all the work they've done in string theory, which looks like it may not be going. I don't want to say haven't gone anywhere, but they may have just been on the wrong track for 25 years, 40 years, whatever. Either way, they found some really cool math. Maybe this could be subtitled, "Can we salvage something out of string theory?" Crikely dikely do. This is going to be a tough one. I mean, I'm going to get it. I won't stop till I'm done, but it's going to be a tough one. I might need another sip of beer. Oh, my back is sore. I'm trying to make sure I get enough sleep, and lately I've only been getting about 18 to 20 hours. Does every mathematical symmetry have a manifestation in the physical world? It almost goes back to Sam Harris's question. They should those two questions should dance and see who wants to lead. All right. We've got this huge branch. It's interesting because the more we find out about the world, it seems to me the more that we find uses for mathematics that we're like, oh. In fact, I remember this story. I think it was by I think it came from, I heard it from Richard Dawkins, but it was about. Oh, actually, I think I heard it from my friend John, maybe, but he was talking about a certain mating strategy that, or a certain, no, it wasn't a certain mating strategy. It was a strategy about, I think, either snakes or turtles or something. I think it was snakes, where it was like they would have a nest, but they would want to defend the nest, but there was, or their area, their territory, whatever. But there was a diminishing cost for returning the territory based on some kind of variable or metric or something like that. So at times it would be better to defend it, and at times it would be. But anyway, this was found through a type of mathematical exercise inside of evolutionary biology. It wasn't found in the physical world. It was found via mathematics, and then they happened to find it in the physical world. So it was like, and I'm sure that's not the only case, but it was like, okay, we've got this interesting math about how evolution might work. We don't have an example of it, and then boom, they find an example of it, because it's like, and that leads you to the idea, at least that little thing there leads you to the idea of what he's getting at here. That, and I'm going to give that question more room. It's nothing about seeing me; it's about giving the question more room. That gives a little ammunition to his thought that maybe if we discover more about the physical world, we will see that every math that we can see is manifested somehow. But is there something limiting that would preclude us from answering this question? Is this question subject to the limits of Gödel's incompleteness theorem. Is it Gödel or is it Archie Bunker? I can't remember. But how would we determine that? We'd have to, in a way, we'd almost have to step outside of the universe itself, I think, to be able to determine that. So how do we step outside of the universe? How would we determine this? Well, why don't we make our own universe? How would we measure that universe? How would we observe that universe and be able to say anything smart about it? If we could make a universe, maybe we already have. Probably not, maybe. Words coming fast, thoughts coming slow. Well, let's tear it apart. If you can't answer it, answer the question, tear the question apart. What is the physical world? We think we know what the physical world is. We think we know what matter is, right? Is the physical world in some ways conceptualized as a subset of the mathematical world? Now, if that was the case, then by definition, that would not be true. Could you conceive of the physical world as the manifestation of some? Still wouldn't be. Then there would still be some type of subset or. Does the discovery by the mathematicians of mathematical symmetries instantiate the symmetry in the physical world, in the substrate of the synapse and the as information? Is information physical? Do you call information part of the physical world? If I have an idea in my head, if I'm thinking about the Mona Lisa, is that a manifestation in the physical world? If it isn't the physical Mona Lisa, is that? But I still have an idea of the Mona Lisa. Are you saying that that my idea of the Mona Lisa is not a manifestation in the physical world? So my answer, David Hook, to your question is, until we don't labaduba, my babbling. My answer is my answer to your question is, David Hook, your question of does every mathematical symmetry have a manifestation in the physical world? I'm going to say absolutely, but we won't know what that is until we actually understand what the physical world is, and we don't. So we can't define part of your question. Once we can define that part of your question, then we'll have your answer, which is yes, because I can see farther than I can see. So the answer is yes, but I can't tell you until you tell me what the physical world is. Thank you, Daniel Hook. next up, we've got John Horgan. Another name I'm familiar with. I mean, not the person, but I'm very familiar with the name John, and I'm also somewhat familiar with the name Horgan. John Horgan is the director for the Center for Science Writings, the Stevens Institute of Technology. There's all these places that seem like they'd be great places to learn about, maybe places to work, maybe places to whatever, have an illicit affair, whatever, that I've never heard of. I'm also assuming that that's technology, because all I see is Technolog. It would be kind of more interesting maybe if it was just Technolog. John Horgan's last question is, what will it take to end war once and for all? Back the truck up a couple hours or a couple days, and I think I just said the measure of progress in society, or I should have said, if I didn't say it, that the measure of progress in society will be our progress in redefining what we call war. So preface that, or reference that, I should say. You can preface it too, but that won't make a whole lot of sense. I'll preface my answer with referencing that. How to answer this? 1, take war to mean literal human conflict over resources, which results in one side winning, one side losing, and biological death being commonplace. Let's take a war at that kind of literal of a. Let's not stretch the definition too much. Well, the either the drastic, if you get rid of make Arthur Laffer irrelevant, or get rid of the I don't even remember his whatever. Make you just turn economics into a curiosity for the intellectual archaeologist, but it doesn't apply anymore. Basically, when there doesn't need to be competition for resources, so because the resources that we're interested in, that we consider important to be able to function, are gettable, and they're not scarce anymore, or they don't look scarce. I think a certain amount to that will just be, to the extent that we can make energy, and to as much as it's still prized real estate, and all the things that we crave, as to the extent that they are no longer scarce, is to the extent that we can get rid of war. Also to the extent that, now I'm going to finish up this half of it first. So we got to kind of leave what we call traditional economics in the dustbin of history, so to speak. That may sound impossible and Pollyannish and whatever. But all we need is nuclear fusion and nationalization of the ice cream industry, and I think we're 80% there. But seriously, folks, what's other sources for? If we're not going to fight for resources, we fight over ideologies. So once we have complete cultural and ideological homogeneity, that's going to get rid of war. That's not going to happen, though. I've already said that a couple hours back. It's we are living in a bipolar world, and I'm a bipolar girl. I mean, polarization is just inherent in the tricks evolution is going to play. So we're not going to have cultural mono blah blah blah. The system isn't gonna allow for that. So the potential will always be there for ideological wars. You know, this is important, not that. I think increasing access to information will be a potential barrier to ideological types of wars. I mean, underneath even ideological types of wars, though, I think there's typically just been war for resources. They were more just framed as ideological war. So you get rid of the undergirding thing that ideological wars were cooked up for, which were resource wars. Is there still enough there to, are we just going to find stuff to go to war about because that's what we do? Lessen scarcity for things. That's the one way. The other way is, and okay, I'm going to consider that half of the question answered. The other way is, let's define. You get rid of war by creating better games to play where what we call war doesn't have the consequences of what we traditionally consider war. So we have like informational warfare, but it's we get our juices out, so to speak, our hormonal whatever that we have that's kind of ingrained in humanity. We get it out by by conflict, which doesn't necessarily involve physical conflict, but is cultural warfare, informational warfare. We play games where, and we call them war, but they're war games. No, we play games that, if you win, it doesn't mean your opponent dies. And if you lose, it doesn't mean you can't eat tomorrow. But they still have a payoff, at least in terms of satisfying our certain biology that works, So that's the other way. Is we build on top of this cathedrals of cultures and all this kind of stuff. We build better games with, ouch, ow. We play, instead of playing Risk, we play Monopoly. And instead of playing Monopoly, we play Chutes and Ladders. And instead of playing imprint that onto humanity. That's how it gets better. Games people play needs to be better games. So the answer, John Horgan, to your question, what will it take to end war once and for all? It's a two-pronged answer. One of them is eliminate or drastically reduce scarcity as even a thing. And the other way is to build better games that we play where our conflicts don't end in death for the winner. Well, that would really be don't have such negative consequences for the winners and the losers. And thank you. And I think I lost my... I don't know why that happened, but we're back. I love a good technical glitch. And stand there, folks. I'm going to do something really quickly. You know what? No, I'm not. I'm a liar. I'm back. I'm leaving. Thank you, John Horgan. Two-pronged answer and to your one-pronged question. Next. Come on. Next we have Sabine Hossenfelder. That interesting name. Sabine Hossenfelder. Sabine is a research fellow at the Frankfurt Institute for Advanced Studies. That is in the Ozarks, I'm pretty sure. Sabine's last question is, how can we separate the assessment of scientific evidence from value judgments? Okay. How can we separate the assessment of scientific evidence from value judgments? We can't. That's why we need AI. No, that's not even true. AI is going to get religious. How can we separate the assessment of scientific evidence from value judgment? So I'm going to take this question, if I can, to mean, so you got somebody that's looking at the results of scientific studies. Say there's 10 studies on the table, and you're trying to ascertain the or get the small t small t truth out of you're trying to answer a hypothesis. You had 10 studies, and that is an assessment of scientific evidence, but it's also, you could say, at least in Sabine's, I think, hopefully, way of thinking, it is a value judgment, which is you want the assessment of scientific evidence to be objective, but it is laden with value judgments because we are value judging people and we are value judging things, and we do science not in some cultural and hermetical vacuum, but we do it in the context of other human beings, and we do it in the context of our own frailties and our own dreams and our own selfish yada yada yada. How do we separate the assessment of scientific evidence from value judgments? Well, she asked how, so I have to kind of assume in the answer that it's doable and it's something that should be doable, but I want to just put a little fork in that, or a little flag there, just to say I'm not sure that that's actually I think what she's seeing as a bug is actually maybe a feature. I don't know. I think objectivity is a god that we pray to, even though it's dead. I have to go back to Darwin, who said, like, it was like, well, because the dominant kind of way of thinking about the world at the time, a way of thinking about science, at least as he perceived it back in the 1300s, because that's when Darwin lived. He's talking about all of science was kind of just like stamp collecting, because it was just like, you just have to, all we do is taxonomize, categorize, we put this there, and there's no overarching thesis. There's no overarching thing. We're just measuring stuff. We're just stamp collecting. And he was kind of just like, no, it's like, what, you know, the collecting evidence has to be, you know, pro or against some hypothesis for it to be of value. And I otherwise it is kind of just like stamp collecting. So, and that hypothesis in itself is inseparable, insuperable from a value judgment, maybe. So I don't know that it's not a bug, but it's a feature. Germany has some really good beers. I'm not gonna lie, but I'm not a huge fan of the malt Sabine because she's obviously in Germany. Germany has good beers. I tend not to like the malty sweetness. I tend to like a little more. When I have my sweetness, I like it in kind of a fruitiness or a. So it's a little more citrusy, or it's a even like this that I think is brewed with probably added a little candy sugar to it, but sweet Zeus, man, this is a good beer, and it's facilitating my answering your question. But let's say it's a good thing that we would want to separate the assessment of scientific evidence from value judgments. Well, then you have to embody agents to do your your assessment of the separation. You have to embody agents that have no need of value judgments, or don't have value judgments, because they don't have personalities, and they don't have their own goals and purpose, which kind of means you don't, because I don't even think AI is going to get us out of that. Or I don't think AI is going to give us really interesting. Well, I mean, it can get really interesting just fitting the curve, so to speak, or finding the lowest cost, blah, 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 to get us on that curve, do some predictive work. But is the shallow AI of what we're looking at right now, even though, yes, it can probably get deep, is that going to help us? Yeah, but it's still not getting where Sabine wants to go. I kind of am coming around to the idea that value judgments are kind of analogous in a way to like um, Einstein's like relativity, simply like, you know, everything is subject to the position and speed and whatever of the observer. And so value judgments are kind of like the sociological human equivalent of Einsteinian relativity. And so how do you get away from Einstein? You get, as soon as you so it's like as soon as you want to try and go from the smallest scale of the quantum of just facts to trying to incorporate facts into a larger thing, you will absolutely get into Einstein's territory, which in biological and cultural terms we call those value judgments. So the only way to separate yourself out of that is to just stamp collect. If you want to stamp collect in science, if you want to just taxonomize, describe. Even that probably has its share of value judgments that go into it, but let's ignore that right now and just pretend that I have a real good thought there. You want to get, to the extent that you can get extremely granular, atomic, and not try and draw much, and just trying to describe the physical world in the context of the physical world, and not try and make anything descriptive out of it, or not judge. As soon as you're trying to make a larger explanatory framework, you start running, you get away from Niels Bohr or whoever, and you get into the territory of Einstein, and you don't get out of that, I don't think. At least that's what this beer is telling me. Can we take one specific example of this? How do we judge Einstein to being accurate? Well, we know he changed the world and he was accurate in ways, but we also know that what he's saying isn't the whole story. We know there's quantum mechanics, and we know there's something underneath or more basic than both of those things, because they don't agree. There's got to be something that can translate, or as humans we're gonna say there's got to be something that can translate or get underneath both quantum mechanics and relativity that can explain it. So what is the judgment of Einstein of E equals mc squared? It's like that's true with an asterisk behind it. It's true in some ways relative to the observer and his scale and his yada yada yada. I just think that there is something about the moment you are part of a system, you are inside the system, you cannot objectively measure the system. You got to be outside of the system to measure the system without bias. Could you design an AI that, for the specific and particular purpose of measuring one or of assessing the scientific evidence for one thing, and somehow divorce that from a value judgment? Well, it comes down to, I guess, being atomized again, in a way. If you make the AI so atomized that it's just trying to do one thing, I think a lot of this gets to just you gotta specialize, and you specialize to the extent that you almost disappear from your specialization. And so to the extent that you specialize, and I'm saying specialize in a very generic way, you specialize, you got to specialize and specialize and specialize to get down to the objective thing, and once you almost get there, you go poof and you're gone. Somehow this all relates to quantum mechanics and the wave function, and yeah, no, it doesn't, but let's say it does. So, Sabine Hassenfelder, I'm going to say, in answer to your question, how can we separate the assessment of scientific evidence from value judgments? In order to do that, you'd have to either need to be outside of the system you're studying. You have to get so atomized, so granular on what you're trying to assess, that probably doesn't even make sense anymore to call it an assessment. You've got to be stamp collecting. You've got to be bean counting. You've got to be, you know, a hypothesis. Well, you can call fitting the can every hypothesis be expressed mathematically? Is it our ignorance of the relationship of mathematics to language and to our own whatever that hides us from the fact that everything that we talk about could be expressed mathematically? I don't know. These are all questions shooting off from this question that I've got to narrow it down because I'm 87% of the way there. And I haven't missed one of these yet. Let's have one more sip of beer. Oh, man, that's just... There's a little like soft caramel there. Little what is it? It was not circus peanuts, but the candy, the big, you know, marshmallowy, but like the circus peanut type things. Really good. Okay. We shouldn't want to. It's a feature, not a bug. That's one answer. If you want to try, you got to get super granular, but then you're defeating kind of the purpose of what you're trying to do. Or you get outside the system. That would be another answer of what you're studying. Or you create a measurement apparatus with the sole purpose of doing the sole thing. Like you create AI with the sole intention of assessing a certain set of scientific evidence. You're trying to fit the curve on a frickin'... But then you're going to run into the same problem because that system still is going to have to feed back to a larger ecosystem of humanity and concerns and stuff like that. So you're not really doing that much. You still got to build cathedrals of knowledge and of intellectual inquiry, and they are built with they are not structure free. They are not. There's types of wood. There's types of concrete. There's no any type of intellectual structure that your build still is based on brick, mortar, wood. Can't get away from that if you're inside the system. So, thank you, Sabine Hassenfelder. Very interesting question. Very interesting name. Good luck in Iowa. Next. I know you guys love it when I do this. I've got to separate that out because I'm just going to start making assumptions about... we can do this in real time. This will be amazing. This is magic, folks. This is magic. Ooh. Look at that. Holy shit. Look at what I missed. I'm going to do this. Hello, hello. Nicholas Humphrey is the Emeritus Professor of Psychology at the London School of Economics, or the LESEC. Visiting Professor of Philosophy, New College of the Humanities, Senior Member of Darwin College, and author of Soul Dust. You gotta lower the bar. You gotta stop doing stuff, or pick a title. It's too much. How about just dude? How about just dude? Wow. London School of Economics, New College, Darwin College. Okay. All right. Okay. Fair enough. I mean, I could brag like this too, you know. I've got a business degree from a tier 4 business school in the Midwest with a double minor in marketing and philosophy. You don't see me putting all that up there under my name, do you? I'm just saying. Nicholas Humphrey's last question is, why is the world so beautiful? Talk to Dolores, Westworld fame. Well, I think we got to build into our model of the answer of this beings with a certain with consciousness and that make value judgments, because it's what we do. You give evolution the natural resources and enough time, it's going to get to something like us. Maybe not all the time, maybe whatever, but maybe the rules on how often and when it gets there are algorithms, excuse me, in and of themselves. But you're gonna get here. You're gonna get creatures that can model themselves, that have a mental representation of themselves, and as such have to value certain things over other things, because our values are our models for how we can conceive of behaving in the world. And without having that, I mean, what's the point of having a model? So we're going to value things. So we're going to pretty much by definition view things as beautiful, ugly, because that's kind of like, I want to say that's evolution's hack, for one of evolution's clever hacks for getting more of us to the you know, if everything was ugly, and if we were able to self-model, but our self-model was like, looked like everything was ugly and bad, then we would become fatalistic or suicidal by nature, almost by definition, and evolution ain't gonna have that, because that ain't the way evolutions. So it's almost tautological. So let's escape out of this tautology. And certainly there is a lot of ugliness in the world, you know. I think in many subjective but close to objective, as close to objective as you can get without falling over a cliff that you're going to fall over when you start trying to get, you know, capital O objective. the world is more beautiful than it was, you know. Of course, there's a lot of people that are just so in love with nature that they would rather go back to 50,000 years ago and just, I don't know, die. So beautiful is eye of the beholder is what is beautiful. Is New York City more beautiful now than it was a million years ago? As a landscape photographer, I'd kind of like to look at what New York City looked like a million years ago. Anyway, I digress. What is beauty? Um, we model the world. We take information in through our interfaces, in through our sights, smells, blah blah blah. We grade those as having I mean, the answer has to be biological and evolutionary. I mean, that's got to be a flavor of it, obviously. You know, Darwin. I don't think he kind of realizes that, but a cheeky answer would be because creatures that didn't think the world was beautiful wouldn't be here anymore. They would have, you know. You could look at beauty as the kind of almost inherent, like absolute value of the property of living. So if you've got a creature that has like a positive value of living, and then they model the world, then beauty is going to kind of come out of that. It's emergent from having a positive value of living. And if you don't have a positive value of living, then you're gonna lose the living game to the creatures that do have that positive value of living. So they'll strive. They'll try and do something. So it could just be a derivative from the positive value of living that biology is going to imbue upon everything that lives. Bottle condition too. Still see yeast in there. This is why you can age these things for 4 or 5, some beers 10 years. It's because they put a little yeast in there as when they're bottling them, so they continue to ferment, but just very slowly because they'll do it at like room temperature. So this beer has still been alive for the past 5 years in this bottle, which is why when you pour it, you still get head like this. You do that to a Budweiser, violence should be done to you. So anyway, I think that's the answer. Other than, I mean, because it's very simple, but it's like, yeah, I think I'm gonna remanifest the answer to the answer I've already had. It's like if it wasn't beautiful, you wouldn't want to live in it. If you didn't want to live in it, you wouldn't have the drive. So it's kind of like, say it a different way. It's like it's I forget where I hear this from, but it's like humans are the only animals die, and when they're about to die, like you can hear their scream, their pain, and it's a terrible, it's a heart wrenching when you hear an animal that is in severe pain and you know it's going to die or know it's in severe pain. But they don't, but they probably as an animal, and again, we don't know everything that's going on in an animal's head or whatever, and it obviously depends on the type of animal, but probably the thought of mortality hit them at that moment, or suddenly it just became like whatever. It's like, oh, I'm gonna die. It's like, and that's that scream, maybe even more than the pain. Maybe it's that realization or something. In the context of which I heard this, I heard this idea that religion is the expression of that pain in humans, because we are able to conceptualize our own mortality, our own death, our own whatever, and that psychic pain is kind of expressed as religion. And I think it's at least a very interesting thought. And so you can view kind of the expression of the thought of death as being expressed as religion, and the kind of the as its avoidance in certain ways may just be evolution's. The beauty is evolution's hack for it's a conscious being's echo, manifestation, ghost of the positive value of life, of living, of striving that will be selected for in biology for any biological creature. It's the echo, it's the ghost, it's the whatever. It's evolution. It is evolution's hack, but it's specifically towards, you gotta, if a biological thing doesn't want it, it ain't gonna get it. And if it wants it, once it can model itself, it's gonna manifest itself in some ways as beauty. Plus, polarization is going to polarize. I mean, you get beauty because you get ugly. So it's humans going to evaluate. We have to. We put things on poles because that's how we ski. I mean, we put things on continuums with these things at this end because that's the landscape of where the competition, the creativity, that's where it goes. And why do we have these landscapes of competition? Because they just arise out of the math. So, Nicholas Humphrey, I'm just going to say dude, because I'm not going to repeat all that stuff again. That is your answer for why is the world so beautiful? Crazy question. Crazy question that you could spend a year on, but not anymore, because I've answered it. So, boom, we're done with that one. Next. I'm just gonna keep going here. Yeah, we're gonna have to do some. We're gonna have to rearrange the room a little bit. We have to do that. We don't have to do that. We do have to do. Holy cow! Marco. I'll just do this. Let me see that. I'm gonna do that. I'm going to read the title here, and then I'm going to switch this back. Marco Iacoboni. It's a very Italian-sounding name, and so is Marco. Marco's a neuroscientist, professor of psychiatry and behavioral scientists. It's an interesting mix there, being one very... okay, anyway. Marco Iacoboni is neuroscientist, professor of psychiatry and behavioral sciences, David Geffen School of Medicine, and author Oh, David Geffen School of Medicine at UCLA. David Geffen of musical recording fame. Good to see that he has done some good works there at UCLA, which is also known as the University of California, Los Angeles, and author of Mirroring People. And I wonder how much of that has anything to do with mirror neurons and how much of it has only to me to be thinking about mirror neurons at this moment and have nothing to do with that. And now we're going to take away all of that title. We're going to take your title away, Marco Iacoboni. And we're just going to get back to your last question here, which is... Marco Iacoboni's last question is, how does a thought become a feeling? My initial thought was you're maybe putting that in the wrong order. So I'm going to put a flag there and just... I mean, well, a lot of that depends on what you're conceptualizing a thought as. If it means it's something like what is I mean, so much of how to answer some of these questions goes into how I interpret the question, of course, because communication isn't perfect. And why does this keep quitting on me? Sorry, guys. I mean, I have no problem looking bad, but I don't want to look terrible. So I wanna see if I can take this question take the question at face value. How does a thought become a feeling? Because we know that can happen, right? You read, okay, let's say you're reading a book about a character who undergoes something that we judge to be horrifically unfair, painful in some way, and we feel a sense of empathy, a sense of wanting to help that, a sense of whatever. I mean, obviously it doesn't have to be reading, it could be anything, but let's just take it away from, excuse me, let's keep it fictional for a moment so that we don't, I think that might help us to keep it fictional. We can care about, about fictional things, so we can keep it in kind of you keep it out of biology, unless to the point where we become modeling biology. Anyway, how does a thought become a feeling? So I hear about someone that's undergoing something bad. I feel bad for them. It's a guttural boom. It's Can we at least work the other way around first? Let's talk about feelings. What are feelings? In a way, I feel like they're kind of guardrails that are put on us by biology, and to a lesser extent culture, or to some mixture of biology and culture, which is they're already mixing regardless. So, but they're guardrails put on existence to try and get us to continue to exist and move about the landscape in a way that allows us to continue to move about and is productive in moving about that landscape. So those you could call feelings as kind of those guardrails, those those early senses, so that's what we can call a feeling. Primitive navigational structures. primitive navigational technology. Let's call a feeling a primitive navigational technology. How does a thought, trigger, let's call become trigger. How does the thought trigger a primitive navigational technology or a primitive navigational button? Framed that way, how can it not? Doesn't kind of every thought have the capacity, the inherent, the latent capability of becoming of having the ability to affect our navigation in our idea space, biological space, whatever space that you want to conceptualize it in? A thought could affect one's ability to navigate that space. Therefore, thoughts have the capacity in them to trigger the innate primitive blah 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 blah. But he's asking how. I'm not even asking the right question, because he's asking how, not why. He's asking how, which sounds about which talks about, or I'm thinking the engineering of it, the synaptical, neurological, sensorial interface that translates all of that stuff. How do you go from the Yiddish of thought to the blues of feeling? How does a neurological structure perform that feat? I want to say it could be apropos of nothing or apropos of everything. Generally, they are. One thing we should think about is the idea that our feelings and I don't know enough about the current state of neuroscience, neurobiology, the conceptualization that they're using, in the current models that are in place in neurobiology. But my thinking is that wherever they're at, they may. Just say it. Feelings may be more tied into our reptilian parts of the brain in more ways than is currently in fashion, if I'm saying that right. Like like we get feelings out of our, like they're more corporal than, you know, than maybe the models may be thinking about, you know, somehow the executive function in the prefrontal cortex or whatever is kind of like floating off on its thing or whatever. And I think what he's trying to ask here is how does the, another way of asking this might be how does like the, is it the cerebellum or the cerebrum? I forget, you know, whatever. We'll just call prefrontal cortex, the integration of that with our more reptilian brain and the brain stem and all that kind of stuff. How does that interoperate and translation work? My thinking is that based on what I was just thinking about before, that the models need to be more, almost maybe less centric, almost just like you start from the parts of the brain more closer to the sensory organ or the sensory thing itself. Maybe you start with the optic nerves and trace your way backwards rather than, you know, or I don't know. Okay, let's trace our way backwards then. How was the thought? Okay, so I still think that, you know, there's a big part of me that just wants to say that that whole thing is it's framed, if it's framed in the wrong order, at least the way I'm conceptualizing thought and feeling. Even when I thought of, well, maybe not. I made myself think of. I made myself think of. I was thinking about being in Patagonia, and I was thinking about being alongside this waterfall, or about 50 yards downfield from this waterfall, and people were going to the waterfall. But I was in my own little world, and it was the middle of fall in Patagonia, and I was right beside this river, and it was the most beautiful, peaceful, calm, incredible, you know, the bubbling brook with the rocks and the beauty and just the distant waterfall, and it was so, the poetry of the natural world was just in full effect there. And what feeling did I have when I thought that? So I had a thought, led to a feeling. I mean, I don't even know if it's, I don't know if it's a linear train that we want to, that's the best way to conceptualize it. It's like we want to build linear models out of it's like we want to build linear models out of loops. But, you know, doesn't mean there isn't linearity. There has to be. You can't have you can't have a biology that is just loops, right? Mm. My neck is sore. Oh, I know why it is too. Mm. I haven't kicked anyone's pet in weeks. my friend might be joining us soon. I'm not sure. It's possible. So, anything more to say on that? I feel like I've got an 88% solved, but not quite 100. Wipe the brain clean, like you can do that. Wipe it clean. Oh, we'll do the Jeff Daniels Dumb and Dumber. A new kaleidoscope of thought's going to hit me. How does a thought become a feeling? Could you view it through a context of feelings feelings are thoughts plus identity? Feelings are thought plus subjectivity? Feelings are the fashion industry of the intellect? I'm just thinking in a different context of how maybe the thought... all these analogies that don't make sense, but it's like the... It's like feelings are like the Higgs boson for biology. So, Marco Iacoboni, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. It's a wonderfully sonorous name in which I'm I'm sure completely butchering it. The answer to your last question of how does a thought become a feeling is understand the relationship of the Higgs boson to mass, translate that via evolutionary rules to biology. That's how it happens. Thank you for the question. Next, we have and this is another one. I have to do this again. This is a long ass title. Whee! This I should probably just do it like this. This would be much better. Might look a little bit funny, but it feels better. Isabel. Wow, this is a name. Isabel. I'm going to tell you right now. I am going to screw up the pronunciation of your name, and I don't like to because I don't like to in general, and also I'm a lousy human being. But you kind of seem like an attractive female, so what are you going to do? But Isabel Benki Izquierdo. I think the Izquierdo is pretty good. I'm not sure about the. I'm just going to say Isabel Benki Izquierdo. And I'm going to shorten that to Isabel if you don't mind, because Isabel is a beautiful sonorous word in and of itself. And by now we all know who that I'm talking to. And I'm going to keep doing this, even though the problem is over here. Talking about your mirror neurons. I despise lint combs. Isabel Benki Izquierdo is a primatologist, associate professor at the Social Complexity Research Center, KICS. I wonder if they say KICS or if they say, I don't know, who knows. Hope they don't say six. Gobierno UDD Santiago. I have been in Santiago de Chile. I have been in Santiago. I liked Santiago. I was on my way down to Patagonia. Santiago is nice. Patagonia is amazing. And Santiago is an interesting, nice city. And they have at least one good beer bar there where they have some really good Belgian beers, including, if I'm remembering correctly, some Flemish sours. You can find a Flemish sour in Chile. Gotta love it. You know what? That's not that surprising because they have got good wines too. So the same type of cultivated palate, whatever, that's going to induce someone to really want a good wine. You could see that type of intellect in terms of the culinary would also inspire some good beers. So it's not too surprising actually if you think about it. But anyway, Santiago, interesting city. Patagonia changed my life. And I still only got halfway through her title. Isabel's a primatologist, associate professor at the Social Complexity Research Center at Gobierno UDD, Santiago de Chile, and the visiting researcher, Social and Evolutionary Neuroscience Research Group, University of Oxford. So she's one of those, she's raising the bar, one of these bar raisers. You should go to the bar, not raise it. That's the whole point of humanity. Go to the bar, don't raise it. Okay, so I am going to now get rid of that title while keeping her face, name, and question in frame. Isabel's last question is, what is the biological price of being a species with a sense of humor? Oh, man. Well, I know it's cost me more than a few mates. So I can attest to the fact sometimes you just got to go for the bit, even if she walks out the door. So I concur that there certainly is a price. I mean, there's a flip side of that, of course, as well. But, okay, what is the biological price of being a species with a sense of humor? Because it has to have its advantages, obviously. I mean, we could go back to Lat's question about why is the world so beautiful, is to just, you could specify that into different cognitive terms and give you your answer for, what its advantage is. But price. I wonder if she sees primates, different other primates, as having a sense of humor. And as a sense of humor, I mean, not like they're. How would we know a sense of humor in another species unless they were laughing at the same thing? There was some independent object and they were both laughing about it. How would you be able to? I mean, okay, so you play hide and seek with an infant, and you're assuming that they're saying that that's funny. Might actually get somewhere via that avenue of thinking. Okay. So say an infant is laughing at you when you show your face and then don't show your face, but what is that? And in a way, you're training their brain, and they are, because that is kind of in a way, humor is going against the expectation. Humor is, at least in some contexts, the unexpected. It's a manifestation of the unexpected, which happens, it doesn't happen in real combat. It typically doesn't. Humor isn't. There's no comedians in foxholes. There are, but what I'm saying is the arena of humor is an arena of one that we get to do while we are not fundamentally searching for food or doing the base things that we're doing. So it's so what is the cost? Because everything's got its cost. There's no free lunch in biology and evolution. What's the cost of that? What the hell is a sense of humor? What is a sense of humor at its deepest level? Is the zigzag, is the unexpected, is going left where someone's going, is that so foundational to a sense of humor that's one of the it is the capability to model that, to break out of ruts, norms, to dance. I want to conceptualize a sense of humor for the moment as like it's the brain dancing. See if that takes me anywhere. I don't know. Well, the biological price of the brain dancing is it could be fucking. I mean, in a very biological sense, or also in a more metaphorical sense, but it could be analyzing the structures and the X's and O's of the reality in which that brain finds itself in, and attempting to contextualize it to manifest the proper behavior and the proper ways to go in that reality, which I mean you wouldn't call having a sense of humor as at least directly that. You could in other ways say that they lead to a higher level of that, but they are not directly at that level. So the price could be, you know, price could be just I've got cleaner. I don't use that. It's just there. It's like a museum piece, but I do have cleaning agent. Yes, it's part of a diorama, which I'm hiding from you. So the cost is intellectual. Is the cycles lost on being intellectually pragmatic? Is there something about a sense of humor being kind of the opposite of being intellectually pragmatic, which I guess isn't that far removed from dancing, or dancing as opposed to just get it on. And it's a good question because it's well, the price would be well hid, right? The price would be well hid. It also makes me think of even things that we think are kind of like universal good things in terms of biology and in terms of like a fitness landscape or something. Like everything has a cost, everything has a price. Or is it even, does it make sense to conceive of things that way? I mean, does biological symmetry, does that have a cost? Yeah, is it meaningful to think about symmetry as like, okay, this has a cost? I mean, I guess it does have a cost because there's maybe a cost to maintain that symmetry. There's a cost to instantiate the symmetry. There's a, but once that cost is paid, you're free to accrue benefits on top of that. It makes me want to answer the question of saying whatever the cost, whatever the price is, we paid it a long time ago, and we're just kind of we may we may have got a we may have got a humor bottleneck somewhere in the proto primates, uh, where we almost died out because of like one too many knock jokes. We just made it, and then it was clear sailing from there. I feel like the cost it may be that the cost was much higher, but then if the cost was much higher in the past, then you think of we would have never gotten here in the future. But maybe we did kind of come to a bottleneck and then boom. Because I'm getting the feeling that the well, okay, maybe our having a sense of humor is equivalent or similar to my thought of the ability for humans to ponder, to doubt, to question, to sit on a rock and go and have Degas make a sculpture of them. Like that's new on the biological, that wasn't around, at least we would think about it a long time ago, because if you did this, you get torn apart by a mountain lion, or by a swallowed up by a snake or something like that. So the ability to be physically lazy and intellectually engaged is a newcomer onto the biological landscape. So how does that play into? So I guess maybe what I'm thinking is, if a sense of humor arose after recapitulating all these theories of comedy in my head that I don't. Just thinking maybe a sense of humor arose as a consequence of humans' ability to deal with the concept of death, or sense of humor arose as we became aware of death as a species, as we became aware of that was a sense of humor is biology's first line of defense against the conscious awareness of death. So does it make sense to think about what is the cost of a first line of defense? Defense against what? Defense against the existential psychic pain of the concept of one's own death. If you are just preoccupied with the thoughts of one's own death, you can't move around the world. We invent a sense of humor as a way of dancing on our conscious, theoretical, mental graves. But what does that cost us? The truth? Where's my friend? does it cost us looking at the world in a sense of humor hides the pain of the truth. What is the biological price of that? What is the biological cost of not? What is the biological cost of not being able to stare at the sun, metaphorically, and having humor distract us? I have figured that out. But Isabel, you'll have to share a glass of wine with me, or a good Belgian beer in either Chile and Santiago or New York City. Otherwise, I'm not going to tell you. But I've got your answer. Another profoundly interesting question. That's on the top. I'm making a value judgment and making that on the top of the top of the most interesting questions. Anyway, we're gonna tab. We're gonna tab, not. I got one more in me here. See if I have one more in me. I'm going to do this again. I'm getting good at this. This next. Okay. Go Beavers. I don't think they're the Nittany Lions, but I'm thinking of this girl from Beaver, Pennsylvania. Anyway. I think I know who my friend is now. I didn't know who my friend was before. I think I know who my friend is now. And I'm kind of annoyed that it's making itself known in this way, but I'm not sure. So we'll find out. Anywho, Nina Jablonski is a biological anthropologist and paleobiologist. That's a paleobiology is just the study of fatty exercise habits and eating habits. Man, I can't even pull off a joke right now. Nina Jablonski is a biological anthropologist and paleobiologist at the Evan Pugh University of Anthropology at Pennsylvania State University. Now that I have that out of the way, let's get it out of the way. When will race disappear? As soon as we stop running. When will? Okay. This is a question more closely tethered to reality, I would say. Although, my hope, and this is in no way to disparage your question, Nina Jablonski, I think it's a good one and an interesting one, but I think you will agree with me, possibly, that whatever the answer to that question is, I hope that more and more we will live in a culture and in a world which we don't really care about the answer to the question, because it's so superfluous to anything that's really worth talking about. But then again, I don't know that that's true. I mean, I think about that. I have to be honest. It's like, okay, what do we want to call race? What do we call race? Because the answer to the question is bound up in what we're calling race. Okay, what do we call race in the commonplace, how the average person, like, let's think about it in the way the average person thinks about theory versus the way versus how scientists think about the word theory. So let's talk about race in the word in the context of how the average person thinks about race, not how a biological anthropologist or blah 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 would think about race. Not your talking about clades and families and genomes and stuff. If you're just talking about, okay, people that look kind of different because they're from different parts of the world, and let's just take it there. Let's just take it at that level. Do we want that to disappear? Would we want a physical diversity that was not localized anymore? Would we want, and how would that diversity manifest itself? If everybody became like middle gray, or if everybody became just, a tan version of whatever, would that even be good? Would we want that? Certainly there are negative aspects that come to race, because we can put we can bring along all of the package and the baggage that we've done throughout our history, our red in tooth and nail, and we can put that onto the concepts of race. But I almost feel like a better question is, how could we rescue race from biology? I don't know if that makes any sense. This is so dependent on your definition of what race is. But in another way, it's not. So let's take it at the commonplace level of of facial structure and other things that are rough maps to your ancestry, that are rough maps. They're say racial characteristics in as much as they are. See? Look at that shit again. Why do you keep doing this? It says 41%. You son of a bitch. Okay. Whatever. Where was I? Defining race. Racial characteristics, as much as they make sense to talk of them, can we say that they are... Let's just talk physically. Let's just talk physically, because I don't even know if it even makes any sense. If it does, it's just an echo. It's a faint echo. Yeah, if it makes any sense at all, it's a very faint echo of the physicality of the whole thing. So the physicality of it is like, okay, it is a kind of a living race. Race is kind of a living, what's the word for, not map exactly. You know, it's a living testament to our geographical localization and our geographical characteristics and all that kind of stuff. So I don't even know if we want that to disappear. When will it disappear? I will say the necessary condition for that is going to be we stop having children biologically. Like women stop having a 9 months gestation period and that whole thing. I think that will likely happen before race disappears, but I think race as a interesting thing to talk about is likely to disappear long before that, I guess I would say. We are more and more endowed with the ability to both live in such a way and create identities for ourselves that are less and less bound to our parochial, circumstantial, biological, evolutionary, the mere facts of that. It's like we're more and more able to untether that, to see them as as things that can be jettisoned, because we can live more virtually. We can create, our own identities are, malleable. They can be completely different in terms of virtual identity. They can be divorced from our physical identity. So that question, race probably won't disappear anywhere in the near future, but race being a large percentage of our identity, or our conception of others' identity, which I think is the much more important aspect of the question that I think you might be asking, that I think is in the process of disappearing, and you will be able to measure the ability of it to disappear almost by the unfolding of the ones and zeros across the world, of the amount of our time spent as a species interacting with the internet, interacting with virtual reality, interacting with all of these other areas of potentiality that race doesn't even, it doesn't even make sense really. It's not an interesting thing to talk about, It's not a, so it's not going to disappear physically from the faces and the bodies, but it's going to disappear as a thing worth talking about. It will become you will need cultural anthropologists to dig up race as an interesting subject. That's Pollyannish. That's a little bit idealistic, but hey, I'm in an idealistic mood, so. The concept of physical differentiation and how we view race that way, it's not going to disappear, but that being an interesting question will disappear because we're virtualizing ourselves and we're freeing ourselves from those bounds of biology and parochial nature of our temporal ancestry. Very good question, Nita Jablowski. Thank you very much. Let's see how much more I have in me. These are taking their toll. Next, we have, let's do our old spreading thing here. Not that spreading. Not the kind of spreading you're thinking about either, you cheeky monkey. Let's get Matthew O. Jackson. Oh, I'm becoming incredibly proficient. My friend is laughing at me. Whee! I needed it just for that. Next we have Matthew O. Jackson, who is a professor of economics at Stanford University. Incredible hockey team. Air hockey. Stanford Institute, and CFAR, which stands for Matthew O. Jackson. Matthew O. Jackson's last question is, will humanity end up with one culture? And boy, it's going to depend. I don't want to take the easy way out, but it's going to depend on your definition of culture. It's kind of like, I know, it's going to be so relative. We're gonna like, the answer to that question seems like it's gonna be something like, it's like the way, I've got to follow this up with words that make sense because I led up to something. kind of feel like I need Obi-Wan Kenobi for the answer to this or something. Yes, from a certain point of view. Um, you know, it depends on your perspective. I mean, the, I feel like it will look, if you could just freeze what humanity thinks of itself and culture, and take a ice core of that, you know and the way that we think about culture now, as kind of like, we see it, you know whatever kind of quote unquote Western culture was kind of, I don't want to say taking over because that's not a real good word for it, but it's synthesizing and then just incorporating, but it's kind of homogenizing. It's okay, let's just say culture is McDonald's being everywhere. Our conceptualization of how we look at culture, if we use that same lens of 2020 to look at how the world's going to look like in 2070, our 2020 view is going to be like, oh, it's all the same, because we won't be able to see the differences that will be operational, and that will be the things that we're looking at in 2070. So culture is going to continue to diversify, but the set of the ecosystem upon which differences are built, which is what we're going to call culture, are going to change to such a degree that it won't be, you can't look there from here. You can't get there from there. So it's gonna, if the question is forward looking, we're going to say that answer is yes. But if we are looking at it from the perspective of the person in 2070, we're going to say people are idiots. What are you talking about? And so we're just going to sit there and argue with each other like parents and children do. I feel like there's something in there. I just need to add 4 more words and it's perfect. 1, 2, 3, 4. I think that to get a little bit deeper into why I'm thinking this way, I think that and pegging upon the answer to the last question, which was about, wasn't the last question, when will race disappear? And it's intimately, you guys got to get together and whatever, but have your questions at least flirt with each other, because they're kindred souls, those questions. Because will humanity end up with one culture? I don't think that we will, because I think that there are probably dynamics in, and this goes past my ability to think about, and well past my capability to communicate what I'm thinking about. So this may just be blurbings, but there are deeper kind of, I don't want want to get underneath biology because then I can't even rescue it from getting underneath biology. But I'll just say evolutionary theory is in general not one that is looking for a one answer to solve any problem or to, you know. So to kind of finish that thought, there's probably something in the evolutionary game in which we're going to create differences and play upon those differences as a way to kind of compete. But taking the idea of, is culture is it the ghost in the machine of the accident of our birth, in terms of, like, you know, what was the ecosystem in which we were born? Culture is the answer to the problem of the ecosystem, in a way. If the ecosystem becomes universalized, or if it becomes rather, if we all become part of a bigger, if we all become part of a larger cultural fitness landscape, which has its descent slope becomes universal, do we all end up at the bottom of that slope? I don't think biology will, not even, no, you have to get below biology. I was gonna be like, oh, you can't get below biology. You gotta go bio, you gotta go bio, you gotta go bio. You have to go below biology to get into these kind of mathematical symmetries, which can be re-expressed as polarities. We can be re-expressed as binormalities, which can just be re-expressed as bi, which is re-expressed as not one, which is expressed as there are going to be things that are going to push up against one culture. But the fitness landscape is going to change so much that it isn't going to be based, culture isn't going to cease to be based primarily upon geography and those type of things. Culture is going to be continually and more an artifact of our built reality, our concepts of reality that are on top of anything in the physical world. So, as opposed to us becoming more homogeneous, as opposed to our culture becoming more of just all one and the same, our culture is actually going to take off an incredible new diversity and more complexity and more flavor and more variation, but it just won't be based on physicality anymore. It will be based on the universes and the cathedrals that we're building virtually. That's where culture is going to take off. So, there's where you maybe get your differentiation there, is because maybe at the end of the day, there's going to be a McDonald's in Porto Natales. I swear that'll be the end of, I'll be like, okay, we can just end humanity right there, you know. But even if there is McDonald's in Porto Natales, Matthew O. Jackson, the people in that McDonald's will be building stuff of incredible diversity, incredible variation, and that will be their culture. And so, depends upon the observer. If you get, and because that will be the culture that makes sense. That will be where the differentiation is. So that's where the flavor will still be, even if every place has a McDonald's and a Walmart there will still be huge intellectual growth, specialization, flavor of the... We'll still be poets. So, that is my answer to you, Matthew O. Jackson. Thank you for the question. Interessante. Interessante. See if we got one more in us. Oops. Okay. I think I should give myself this. I think this 30 seconds or minute between them is important because you don't need to wash your intellectual hands a little bit. You can't do it completely, and you shouldn't do it completely, but maybe a little bit. This next question comes from Jennifer Jacquet. This reminds me of like a Key and Peele thing or something. Like I'm just gonna get. Is Jacquet? It's Jackie. It's Jacquet? Jackie. No, Jacquet there. Don't give me shit. Forgive me, Jennifer Jacquet, who is assistant professor of environmental studies at NYU. It's not far from NYME. And author of Is Shame Necessary? Interesting, provocative title to a book. The answer, of course, is yes, but it is interesting nonetheless, because even questions with somewhat obvious answers, the exploration of why becomes the most interesting part of it. Jennifer Jacquet's last question is, what systems could be put in place to prevent widespread denial of science-based knowledge? Oh, Christ. Oh, Christ, please, at least, please read 1984 before you, and then don't just read it, but breathe it in. Breathe it in. Breathe Orwell into your intellectual lungs, because this sounds so authoritarian. I know you have I know your heart's in the right place. And I know it just sounds like such a we do so much damage to ourselves by just denying science and just I know your heart's in the right place. It really is. But it's like, science is a wonderful tool. And I guess my reservations, my consternations, Jennifer, is that I am of the opinion that there is not nearly as much lint on my shirt as it appears in this video. Now, I am of the opinion that the only effective systems that could be put in that place would be pretty much the same systems that fundamentally curtail free speech. So the dog is gonna bite you. It's the snake of the tail biting the head of the tail. It's this thing of just like you try and you're trying to prevent denial, which is another way of just saying, okay, you have to accept truth. You're putting, anytime you're gonna put constraints on science-based knowledge, you I don't see any way. You don't build better fences, you build better pastures. Uh, you you seduce, you don't deny. And I feel like I am kind of cheating the question by just reconceptualizing it, but I think the reconceptualization of it may be as important as, I mean, because you can conceptualize science denial as like a virus, as like a, it's like Dawkins looks, talks about, and he doesn't get as deep as this as he does into actual, biology but talking about religion as like being a mind virus, and it's just like, at the time that I read that, I was like, oh, it made sense, and I was in my very, rebellious, um, religious mode, and there's a certain truth to that from a perspective, because it is a way to, for example, if, I don't know, we're just going on religion right now, but it is a way to kind of like hermetically seal oneself off from uncomfortable truths about science. Um, so I get that from a certain perspective, but you can't, for example, take religion that lightly, just because religion has been so prevalent in so many species that it had to have had a biological purpose. I'm never gonna. This doesn't get rid of the appearance of anything. Concentrate. Going back to the conceptualization, the the of this problem is the problem. Looking at that as just kind of like a okay. You know what? I'll give it its due and say, let's say that the widespread denial of science-based knowledge is kind of like a disease. If that is the case, it is likely a disease for which the cure for it is worse than the disease itself. I will I will say it that way. If you must, if I have to encounter the the premise of the question, if I have to encounter the question at that level of like looking at as just like, okay, you want to deny science, it's gonna screw you, but it's like, oh, but I'm gonna put in these structures that just like you won't, that's not gonna happen anymore. It's like it's uber authoritarian. It's potentially self-defeating. It is, excuse me, did you see a black cat? Anyway, it is, the systems can't look like systems. They got to look like, this is one area which I think I agree more with Lawrence Krauss than I do with Dawkins, or at least, I'm not sure if I'm even characterizing their, but it science-based knowledge, it has to have an element of seductiveness to it. We have to seduce people into believing it, because there may be many things that are science-based knowledge. I mean, think of it this way. Conceptualize it as like, okay, science-based knowledge is our best tool for kind of like looking at reality as it is. Fair enough. Why the fuck would we want to look at reality as it is? If we can be deluded by a better version than what science is going to tell us, that's always going to have an inherent advantage. And who's to say that science even gives us, we don't build fences, we build better pastures, is the way to think about that. You make it more fun to walk around in the science than you try and put up artificial barriers to say, no, you can't think this way. You can't, because here's another idea. I know it sounds like science-based knowledge is kind of like a thing. You can put it in a box and this is what it is. Every idea, every institution, every thought needs somebody on the other side of it fighting it. And I know, it's difficult for me to say this because I think about so that means like evolution needs creationists. And I'm like, I spent years of my life being like, these creationists, like, I felt just that was the only thing to do was the act of rebellion. But it wasn't the act of rebellion. It was the act of like, I was screwed over by everybody not being honest with me. So it's like, of course I got to get back at these. It's like, you've got to like, and then that is not a mature conceptualization of the relationship between what we're going to call science-based knowledge and the rest of the world. Science is gonna have to be more seductive. And it's very likely I and many other well-meaning humans are going to fight any attempts that are put in place to prevent denial of science-based knowledge, because you can't build that wall which isn't going to shut out so much other stuff. You're putting constraints on humans' ability to think what they want to think into, you are if there are systems which could do that, they would have to be as sophisticated as something like our acquired immune system. Any system, yeah, any system like that would have to be so complex as to be rather analogous to an acquired immune system, or something almost in real time can respond to, um, and at an interpersonal level respond to what you would think as denial of science-based knowledge, because what you and I are going to even call science aren't going to be exactly the same. And I love science, and I worship at the altar of science. But even the idea of what is science needs somebody on the other side to talk about it, which is what I was getting about. It may just be that every evolutionist needs or it needs creation science as much as creation science is wrong. It needs somebody to box, and you can't. You're gonna try and put the bandage on without the boxing match. It's never gonna. I don't think it's gonna work. I don't think that's. I think I've managed to mangle both the English language words and everything in this answer, but I am any system that you could do would have to get so integrated into a person's personal psychology that they don't view it as a foreign intellectual invader, or as they don't view it as a limit. Because I'm even responding to this very like don't you dare tell me what I can and can't think. So whatever system you would have to be able to evade that fundamental human yearning of like, don't tell me something. And you can't get rid of that thought of just like that intellectual middle finger, which is inherent to both science and to its denial and to everything else in worth learning and knowing, is that middle finger. You can't get rid of that. You don't want to. You gotta live in the messy mud of this, and you want to convince people to be more scientific thinking. They know me by my deeds. Pick up your cross and show it. So, Jennifer Jacquet, that is my muddled, largely in Kuwait, but regardless, that's my answer there. I hope that you realize that the complexity that you realize, even realize, is a very it's like, you better realize. I'm not trying to say it that way, so I shouldn't say it that way. I think that the complexity needed to actually do good in the world that could be put in place to do what you're asking would be the intellectual equivalent of like an acquired immune system. And acquired immune systems are pretty much based on one's body in and of itself, which also makes me think that if you could do something, it would have to be in a space of You could do these things, but you have to make them domain specific. It's like what science has kind of tried to do in some ways itself, is be very talk in its own language, do its own thing, back in the shed, and then when it has something, it's like, here you go. You could put those systems in place, but you couldn't just disseminate them among the wider culture. And again, you don't want to, because you have to have somebody up to bat against any idea. That's how it's the Darwinian thought of the idea complex and of ideas. They need somebody to fight. They need to hold their own weight. So denial isn't a bug, it's a feature. Jennifer Jacquet, thank you for your very interesting question. I think I've got enough beer left for one more, maybe. Okay. Hey, look at this. See, I like this guy already because his title fits into the box. Dale W. Jameson. I've had a few Jamesons over my life. Professor of Environmental Studies and Philosophy at NYU, which is, again, not that far from NY me. NYU has I wonder if it's, there's an outsized contingent of NYU professors, whatever, associations. I feel like an outsized contingent, or is it just outsized into my feelings? We could go back and forth on that forever, couldn't we? Dale W. Jameson is Professor of Environmental Studies and Philosophy at NYU. His last question will the hard problem of consciousness dissolve rather than be solved as we learn more about the natural world? I want to just change the word natural. I want to say yes, but change the word natural to artificial. And then we just change this question, and then with a little addendum that says, and everything is artifice, which none of this. So I've just completely changed the meaning of that into meaninglessness. Will the hard problem of consciousness? Well, what is the hard problem of consciousness? The hard problem of consciousness isn't it like, what does it feel like, right? Why do things feel like how they do? What is the intersubjectivity of conscious experience? Will that dissolve rather than be solved as we learn more about the natural world? I'm thinking the photo-negative of dissolve, but it may be contextualized in a very similar way, as become emergent. I wonder if dissolve and emerge are two sides of the same coin, depending on how you look at them. Neither of them are necessarily solved. They look like the rigged. That's a good word for the kind of the rigor and rigid. Rigged. Words. Will the hard problem of consciousness dissolve rather than be solved as we learn more about the natural world? So I'm thinking here, like, we're not going to get a formula that says, oh, this feels like a table because x minus 4. I mean, so in that kind of literalist connotation, I think you're absolutely right, and I'll give you the formula for it. Um, well, one way to conceptualize learning more about the natural world is I'm just conceptualizing like the looking at the natural world in terms of just like a network, and as the network becomes more and more uh, um, as you get more nodes and the communication is faster in the network, you get almost a rising of something emerging out of that, which you could call a certain type of consciousness, self knowledge. Um, and could we conceptualize our learning more about the natural world as just like branch networks becoming more integrated and becoming and lighting up and communicating faster, and almost like looking at it from away, it's like, oh, the Christmas tree's lighting up. Where if you're inside it, you're just kind of looking like this and stuff. If you look outside, it's like, oh, this is what the whole thing is, just the Christmas tree lighting up. So I think he's trying to maybe conceptualize it. It's like, are we just going to see the Christmas tree lighting up rather than have the you know then look at the wires on the bulbs and try and figure out the relationship of the wires on the bulbs. We're just going to see the tree light up, and that's what's going to make sense. It doesn't even make sense to look at or to try and mathematically describe the wires. But I want to argue against that because that's almost saying that there's things that just aren't mathematical or aren't amenable to somehow being boiled down into math, which is in some ways almost the inverse of what I'm arguing. Or it's so, you know, you look at network theory and network nodes and theory and stuff like that, and that is fundamentally mathematical in its nature. So it's almost like saying our emergent properties fundamentally mathematical in and of them. Are they mathematical and describable if they are emergent from mathematically describable things? Are the emergent phenomenon? And how does that play into this? Because I need another sip of beer. That's going to do it. I should be able to answer this. I have a minor in philosophy. I know, I'm supposed to wait for the rim shot for that one. I can only intuit Seems like one of these questions that you have to intuit. I feel like it will either dissolve or the math will become so uninteresting. The math will just be about stamp collecting. What is learning? We take it for granted that we know what learning means, but is learning like, oh, I've got, oh, I got a box of things that I know and I can open up the box and be like, oh, I know this thing. Or is learning integrated into our being? Is learning, the capital of Nicaragua is El Salvador. Is it? I hope so. Well, what's the capital? Isn't there a San Salvador? That's whatever. See, that's learning for you. Or is it no? Or is it dancing? Is that learning? What do we call learning? Probably plays more into this question than a philosopher would. Now philosophers aren't afraid to admit that stuff, but then probably plays a lot into the question. We'll put it that way. If learning incorporates the idea of a network becoming more connected to more nodes and communication going back and forth, if you can conceptualize learning in a way like that, then I think that makes the question easier to answer in the affirmative. But that also takes learning away from a spectrum of maybe understood facts and into a spectrum of almost integrated into the perspective of the internalized external. There's something about learning which could be conceptualized as internalizing the external. Yes, I was wondering when my friend was going to show up. My friend showed up. Hey, welcome. This is my friend. Yes, this is why language is becoming difficult. The bridge from thought to language tends to become a little shaky sometimes, which isn't always bad because that means the landscape at the other side of that might be all the more interesting. There's some philosophy for you. Will the hard problem of consciousness dissolve? When we realize that consciousness is just the universe's way of winking at itself. I don't know, but I'm hungry. So, Dr. I didn't say doctor, but you're a professor, so you've got a foot. So that must make you a doctor. Dr. Feelgood. Dale W. Jameson, professor of environmental studies and philosophy at NYU. Thank you for the interesting question on which I could spend the next 17 lifetimes trying to answer. Will the hard problem of consciousness dissolve rather than be solved as we learn more about the natural world? Yes, because this is, at the end of the day, all that is the universe's way of winking at itself. And once we realize that, yeah, we'll stop trying to do the math of it. The math won't be as important. Interesting question. Thank you for that. Do we have one more before? One more before. How? Yeah. Oh. I'm having a hard. The bridge from thought to language is becoming a little more tenuous right now, so let's make the language that I have to consider very small in and of itself. So I've got I don't have to explore it. I can just dance on it. Ku Zhang A is an artist. And thank you so much for having a very short title of being artist. It fits in the box. And if I did not pronounce your name correctly, I apologize. Ku Zhang A. I'm going to look you up after I'm done answering your question, which the last question is: I equal we? Which I'm going to take in one aspect is the dividing line between the inner subjective and the outer, just as the dividing line between the inner and the outer a construction that is yes. Is it built for purpose? Yes. I feel like saying, it's like when people say things are like, oh, that's just a social construct. Well, it's like, yeah, it's a social construct, but it's the reason why it's a social construct is it's built things upon which we wouldn't have society if we didn't, just to say something is a social construct isn't saying anything. That's all I'm saying. It's just like there's a whole avalanche of things behind Just saying that. You're not really saying anything by just saying something is a social construct. That's all I'm trying to say. On the other hand, writ large, can the idea of the I versus the we, the this is myself versus something else, is that a is that surplus to requirements, and if it is, at what levels it's surplus to requirements? Because it certainly, there's moments and times, and I think we've all experienced them, where the breakdown of the of one's individuality is, say, the malleability of the idea of one's individuality becomes apparent. The interface with one's connection to a larger soul, a larger consciousness, a larger collective, becomes stronger and ebbs and flows. And so, in one's interpretation of standing as some type of, like, I am here and the rest of the universe is there, that can be rather gelatinous as a conceptual framework from time to time. Does that mean that is hiding behind that when it goes into the dressing room, when reality goes into when our intersubjective reality goes into the quote unquote dressing room and takes its clothes off, does it realize not only that it's naked, but that it is become one with everything else that is naked? I can use weird words too. Is intersubjectivity the great con? Let's ask James Caan. Let's do that later, though. The intersubjective is a wonderfully useful perspective. But like all perspectives, its usefulness is derived from what is being viewed. I know those were all words. Subjectivity is a great hack. It's a great hack. Um, the flow of the conscious, the breaking of the breaking down of walls and the reconceptualization of the self as being interfaced to others, as being part of a network. I feel like you could say I does equal we until and unless you introduce evolution into the domain of whatever you're talking about. And I'm not even talking about just biological evolution. Well, then you could just say that's by definition I is not equaling we, because if you're talking about evolution and differential reproduction, then you're automatically saying I doesn't equal we. The problem with I equaling we is problem with purpose. We don't have universal purpose, I don't think, other than to find our own purpose. Both sides of your equation are irrational numbers. So, of course, both sides of your equations are the grandest of load-bearing fictions. As I don't remember where I heard that phrase used first, but it's a less poetic, more engineering way to say lies worth believing, which is the name of the channel. They are, they are like the largest conceptual fictions possible. But they're load bearing. They allow for the idea of why not the idea of I not equaling we is, as unromantic as it may sound, responsible for getting us anywhere. I mean, the larger meta, I'm trying to step back outside of even biology, maybe. Because maybe evolution can even be, it's the concept of the I is the ultimate evolution, or the ultimate expression of the most basic rule of evolution or something. It's just like, oh, there's a unit there. There is a unit of differentiation. There's a differentiated unit. Differentiated how? In what aspects? How does that unit then become reintegrated with the unit? Because it's all a fiction in the first place. Because it is all part of the same system. I think the question might be, when are the best times to model reality in the context of I equals we, versus when's the best time to take out the toolbox of I does not equal we? What is the judicious use of those two cognitive frameworks impact how we go about living in society and how we shape a better society? All that great beer plus a little bit of vitamin B6 and vitamin B12 in the bottom of that thing. Oh, God, that's such a good beer. Man. Anything more to say on the question of, is I equal we? Step outside the universe. Does the question even make sense? I have so much freaking... What is the intersubjectivity of the appearance of tremendous amounts of dirt on your shirt when it really isn't that much dirt on your shirt? And who gives a flying shit? I'm almost getting somewhere with this. I equals we. Who is the I that was almost getting somewhere with this? And what do we think of what do we think of that I? The I is a necessary and useful mental hack, which also gets in the way at times. It's like that old friend that you rely on for advice, even though you've kind of grown apart the past few years, and so you're not sure that even though they mean well, they're not necessarily going to know you enough to be able to give you good advice, because you haven't, you just talked on the phone for the last 5 years. They don't know so much about who you are now to be able to give the best advice for you. That's kind of like the concept of I. We still take the call, though. Anyway, Ku Zhang A. I'm making a mental note right now. Mental note made. I'm going to look you up because you seem like an interesting human. Thank you for the concise question, which is incredibly inconcise at the same time. I could go on for an hour about that at the same time. But I'm going to go on to the next question. Thank you for your question, Ku Zhong A. All right, and to tether us back down to reality, let's go with, just do this for a moment here. You know what, let's just leave this here. Are you that interested in potentially not seeing one part of my earlobe? I'm not. Lorraine Justice is Dean Emerita, Professor of Industrial Design, and that is something that I have yet to encroach upon in this edge question, or that much in my wider life, although very interesting. At the Rochester Institute of Technology, Rochester. Spent some time up at Rochester as a consultant up Rochester, New York. Nice little town there. There's the Green Frog, the Frog, something like that. English bar, good beer bar down there. I'm screwing up the name right now, but a couple nice places down there. Good stuff. Good tapas place. Can't remember the name of it. Probably isn't there anymore. It probably isn't anything. It's just like not there anymore. But hey, it was good when it was there. Lorraine Justice's last question is, what might the last fully biological human statement be at their Last Supper? It's just interesting to me to think about how someone, and this may say more about me than it does about Lorraine Justice. Probably is, because I know so much more about me than I know about Lorraine Justice. But I'm just thinking about like industrial design in the the physicality of it, the concreteness of it, the discreteness of it, the there-ness of it. It's just it's the particle and the particle wave duality. It's the concreteness of it. And this question seems like a very it's a very concrete question. It's asking it's asking for a concrete answer, and it's kind of, I feel like it's like putting it's like putting putting a cane in the stream to understand what the river's like. It's just like that isn't maybe the way to even conceptualize this, or it's okay. It's a perfectly fine way to conceptualize it, but it's just, I guess I'm struggling with what the hell does fully biological mean in this context. I mean, okay, so could you mean like tied to their biology in the context of if they don't eat, sleep, then they won't survive? Let's we've got to epistemologically cleave off some things before we can make anywhere with this. So let's cleave off some things and let's define some things. So I'm saying what she means by last fully biological human statement is that the last human that is tied to their body in such a way that they're okay. Until we've artificially created heaven, basically. But until the last person that when their body ceases to function, they cease to function as an extant entity. What does that person say at the very moment that they're at their last supper? Is a poetic way to say that, but yes. Or at the end of Tolkien, the Lord of the Rings, at stepping on the boat. What is? And I don't want to throw anybody's loop too much, but it might have already been said. This might have already been said. Well, might. Oh, she's given me some flexibility. Thank you, Lorraine Justice, for the flexibility in saying might. Because I can take that might in several different directions as to what it might mean. I'm going to choose might to mean, out of the landscape of possibilities of linguistic endeavors, pick one that the last fully biological human statement could be at their last supper. Well, we could pick it. We could pick it by picking the opposite and pruning away the opposite. Sometimes the best way to find out what you want is to narrow out what you don't want. So they could not be saying, well, I certainly know what it's like to not be fully biological. They couldn't be saying that. They could not give a description of what that feeling would feel like, because they haven't been there. So I want to start nitpicking here, though. I'm just saying, like, no, you know what? Don't nitpick. You could say, well, we won't call ourselves humans at that point, probably, and that's true, but you get the gist. Okay, this meat sack, once we have a consciousness that can exist and not be tethered once at all, what is the last person that to return to a metaphor, fully immerse themselves in the river? What do they say prior to that final baptism? They will say, thank you for coming. I'll get the lights. Actually, the question also might, it kind of implicitly predisposes the person or whatever, the last fully biological person, to know that they're that they are the last fully biological human, because I feel like I'm crowding in on the question and the questioner too much. I need my space. The last fully biological human, more than likely, or at least somewhat likely, may have no inkling that they're the last fully biological human. It's almost, I don't know, I'm my thinking is poetic. This question demands a level of specificity inside of its poetry. Because if the last fully biological human doesn't know that they're the last fully biological human, they'll probably just be like, oh, that was, tastes like chicken. They could do, I don't know what their last statement will be, but they could do worse than by reusing one that's already been used. You know, recapitulation is the best form of flattery. Remanifestation is the best form of flattery, and they could go back and just say, well, that was one small step for man and one giant leap for mankind. Thank you for the question, Lorraine Justice. We've got one more. He doesn't fit in the box, does he? He does not fit in the box. Oh, even if I move the box, there's something deeply Deeply theoretical about. Oh, he's from. He's got ties to Michigan, so he must be. There must be good in him. Gordon Kane, theoretical particle physicist and cosmologist. Oh, he likes makeup too. Victor Weisskopf, distinguished university professor at the University of Michigan. I can say this and say this truthfully. They have an excellent hockey team. Very good hockey team. It's the first time I've said this truthfully. Actually, I don't know how good their hockey team is right now, but I certainly hope it's good. And if it isn't good, that means that not all's right in the world. Gordon Kane, theoretical particle physicist and cosmologist for Mary Kay. It's too easy. Victor Weisskopf, distinguished university professor, University of Michigan, and author of Symmetry and Beyond. And now, before I go to the question, I'm just conceptualizing the idea of symmetry, and of course, no expert, but just the larger, and I haven't looked at the question yet, disciplined of me, the larger concept of symmetries, kind of binaries, bimodal thinking. I can imagine why that would be very seductive for a physicist, because it's so seductive just in general terms, in natural terms, in the way that things are conceptualized, in terms of symmetries and unities, and in terms of the yin yang of the whole thing, and in terms of just like the differentiation undergirds or hides, the differentiation hides an essential unity. And so the idea of two and the idea of two actually pointing to one, that conceptual framework seems like an incredibly seductive one for maybe almost impossible to escape. Maybe that's what AI will help us do, is potentially escape out of the lower level epistemological traps that we set for ourselves. But maybe they're not traps. Maybe they're not bugs. Maybe they're features. Anyway, I'm going to go to Gordon Kane's last question, which is, I was answering it already. Now, are the laws of physics unique and inevitable? And I believe he would agree that those are two different questions. Or is he trying to say that they're one question? There's a quarter set. This beer's so good. I'm gonna drink 86% me and 14% beer. 86% me is good. Are the laws of physics unique and inevitable? Ah, you know what it's doing. Okay. Sorry, guys. Technical difficulties here. Whatever. I don't give a shit. The words are more important than the ones and the zeros. The language manifestation is more important than the visual manifestation of the ones and zeros. Could the laws, one way I'm thinking about this, could the laws of physics be subject to evolutionary pressures in the broadest context of the way that we want to think about evolutionary pressures? biological evolution being only a specific manifest example of broader evolutionary concepts, just the fundamental concept of differentiation and specificity which comes out of any differentiation. Or are the laws just that's the way they are, and you act on the laws, but they don't change? I'm going to answer this, and I know a way that he would appreciate. No, the laws of physics change, and that's why the world really is 6,000 years old. And Darwin was in league with Satan. I just couldn't help myself. Is it more comfortable for us to think that there are a set of laws that are unique? Is that unique and inevitable? Is that the daddy we're looking for in our deep down? Are we just looking for that kind of strength of just like, boom, that's just, I know he's asking a concrete question, but it's like you almost can't help but get. I'm going to dance around in the poetry of the language until one of these dance moves makes sense and incorporate it back into the question he's asking here. Could you put the laws of physics on a fitness landscape? I mean, it doesn't have to be as concrete as that. I'm just trying to manifest this in a conceptual framework where I can ask the question in a way that I can approach it, because I don't have the toolkit of Gordon Kane. I mean, well, let's say we circa 2020, we're looking at the world and we see Einstein, and he's saying, things don't change. This is the way it is. And we see Niels Bohr or whatever, and he says, the wave function collapses and we get probabilities and stuff, but that's just, that's still the static nature of the underlying rules, regardless if they're probabilistic or deterministic. I mean, that's still the rules are the rules, even if we're not, the rules are the rules, even if we're not able to look at them straight on. If we got to approach them from the side, if we've got to be flirtatious with the ultimate, rules of the cosmos. Every once in a while, they'll show us a little leg. But does the leg change, or does our view of it change? laws of physics like? It's like I have to explain, I have to understand. Well, that makes sense. It's like I have to understand this question at levels above the levels at which he's asking the question at in order for me to conceptualize it, which may be its own mistake right there. And it's kind of inherent in the concept of understanding. It's like I don't understand the laws of physics to know whether they could be unique, but if I can understand another conceptual framework or way of thinking about something, because I was thinking about, well, are the laws of physics like Newtonian law or are they like civil law, But Newtonian law is still above the laws of physics. And of course, civil law is. And maybe rather illusory that we're making a large distinction between those two branches of law. There is probably a perspective in which those almost fit. Or they almost overlap. You just got to get the right perspective. But that's not going towards the larger question of, are the laws of physics unique and inevitable? This is going to have to be my last question because my friend is here and he's tugging at my shirt sleeves for more simple pleasures. How would we know? What is the tool set that would allow us to hack time? Hack causality. Is causality all it's made up to be? I wonder if there is a certain need for us to take the laws of physics as kind of objective and unchanging, because that allows us to better conceptualize the system. So it's like you have to view the rules of the system as unchanging in order to really understand the system. Because if the rules of the system are evolving, it doesn't make any sense to. Oh, we lost our. That's a really, that's a good. That's a good image to lose video on. Everything's falling apart. Guy is having its way with us. This is going to be the end of it. We're all done from here on out. You know what? Gordon Kane. Now you are pixels on a screen, and I am pixels on a screen. So we can dispense with the pleasantries, and we can. What was I trying to say? That maybe that's just a useful model for us to be able to look at a system as it's like you got to be able to call whatever it is a river, and so it behaves according to the dynamics of a river, even if it's, even if reality it's just differentiating ocean currents, but we've got to conceptualize it as a river, because otherwise we won't know we don't know how to catch the fish. We don't know where the fish are going to be. Are we a victim of our own conceptual traps? I am certainly a victim of my own linguistic traps here. All right, well, let's look at the question from the idea that unique and inevitable are two different questions. Like, okay, so you could have a law of physics that is unique but isn't inevitable, or in other words, is evitable, just because is the actual all that is possible? This question needs to dance with Sam Harris's question. Could you have 17 different universes with the exact same laws of physics? We don't know that until we can understand our laws of physics. That would determine that. Would being inside of a system necessarily preclude you from understanding the system in certain ways? I am more and more of the opinion that that is the case. Kind of like the ultimate intersubjectivity. Can the system know itself? It could never know itself with also thinking of itself as a self. You can't truly be incorporated and be individuated. What does any of this have to do with his question? Excuse me, Gordon Kane. I'm just gonna approach your question by subtracting everything that isn't your question, and maybe I'll end up with addressing your question. It's a difficult one. which would make sense. So, oh, this program's going to exit because the camera and computer are no longer connected. I don't know if that's apocryphal. Now it's just you and me, Gordon Kane, and now we just have my ones and zeros, which conceptually are a bunch of zeros, and your question, which is ironically now made of the same visual substrate, if we'll not call it physical substrate, but your letters of your questions are in black, the same as my visage. So unique does not necessarily imply inevitable. Inevitable certainly does not imply unique. So they are the Venn diagram of those concepts disappears in a puff of logic. Well, it's a measurement problem. I'm just going to say those words like they have meaning beyond what I've... Man, the gulf between the thinkable and the expressible. So, Gordon Kane, the answer to your last question. Are the laws of physics unique and inevitable? From our limited perspective, the laws of physics, the more and more that we understand them, the more and more they will always appear to us to be, they will of course appear to us to be unique. It will, of course, appear to us to be inevitable. But that's because we can't stand outside of the system to look at it as a, as you look at the way a muscle moves to picking up a heavy weight is the way that physics, our localized physics, responds in a tapestry of possibility. But we're inside the system, so it's just going to look like a dumbbell to us. Thank you for the interesting question, and I hope this answer finds you and finds you well. Gordon Kane. And to that, I will wish you all, until next time, which could be an hour from now or never, I hope these words find you and find you well.